Hey, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome to my top 10 builds of all time. I cannot wait to show you these. We're going to be looking at some builds from all the way back in 2021, some builds that didn't make it into my top 10 of 2022 video, and I've even done some work this year. We've got builds from 5 different zoos to look at. Tekton Zoo, the Wetlands, Florida, the Moonlight World, Pamoja Wildlife Park, and London Zoo 1985. Let's go. First up, we've got the entrance to Pamoja Wildlife Park. This was the first collaboration that I'd ever done, and building this entrance, I was so conscious of how good the other builders were that I was working with, and I was desperate to try and make something impressive. So I combined the presidential palace in Brazil, a temple in Bangladesh, and a modernist house, I think in California, and just tried to make the most ridiculously over-the-top and impressive entrance that I could. And I think I succeeded. Yeah, it's still one of my favourite builds ever, and I absolutely love how this looks. Next up, we've got the Wild China Trail from Tekton Zoo. I got a load of comments asking me why this wasn't in the top 10 of 2022 video. I had a lot to choose from. This was one of the ones that I really wanted to put in, but I just didn't have room for. I love the big habitat for the pandas and the way that you can see them above the habitat for the Asian small-clawed otters as well. This was the final habitat that we put into Tekton Zoo before the Grand Tour, and it's definitely one of my favourites. Next up, it's the Tiger Trail at the Moonlight World. This is probably one of the silliest ideas I've ever had for a habitat, but I do really like it. I decided to put the guests inside a truck inside the tiger habitat based on a safari adventure I saw somewhere in Asia. So I had to put some paths inside the truck that I built and just put the guests on the paths. Unfortunately, the guests don't look particularly happy about it due to the fact that they are trapped on that path, but I really like the effect, and it's definitely one of the most unique habitats that I've built. Now it's time for one of my favourite builds ever, Penguin Palace at Tekton Zoo. This was the first proper habitat build that I ever did on my channel. It was episode 3 of Tekton Zoo, and I still really like it now. It's essentially a supersized version of the penguin pool at London Zoo, but big enough to hold a massive colony of king penguins. I remember being so excited when I hit 25 subscribers after I posted this build. I got some amazing feedback on it when I posted it, and it's still going strong. It's still the centerpiece of Tekton Zoo. I probably put a bit more detail on it if I built it now, but I'm still really proud of how it looks, and it's definitely one of my favorite builds of all time. Next up is the Alligator Swamp at the Wetlands, Florida. This is probably the biggest habitat I've ever built, I think. It's absolutely huge. We've got a lot of alligators in here. I think I ended up splitting it in half so that we could have even more alligators and the males wouldn't fight with each other. It's one of the first naturalistic habitats I built where I tried to make it look more like a sort of gator land, just a big old swamp with some gators in it rather than an architectural kind of build. And my favourite feature is what you're about to see, which is the custom feeder I made, so it looks like the keeper is dangling some meat down for the alligators to jump up and eat. I think that's really cool. Let's take a look at a recreation of a real-life habitat next. This is the Capuchin Tower at Tekton Zoo. It is a recreation of the Great Ape House at Kansas City Zoo, which is simultaneously one of the coolest and one of the worst zoo habitats ever made. It looks absolutely amazing. I promise you it looks exactly like this one does on the outside. And on the inside, it had habitats for pretty much all the great apes, all squeezed into this one building. It was pretty horrific by the sounds of it. So I decided to convert it for just capuchins and later on armadillos as well. So they had a whole load of space, and then used the whole vertical part of the building for trees and climbing. And this is definitely one of my favorite builds of all time. Now we have Penguin Lagoon at Pamoja Wildlife Park. This is a recreation of the submarine adventure at Disneyland. I think it's called that. Might be slightly different. It's a long time since I built this. But basically, I took the submarine adventure ride at Disneyland and swapped the submarines for penguins. We've got a monorail running through the middle of the habitat. We've got all these termite mounds, which I remember being really proud of using to simulate the sort of rockwork that they had there. And then we've got this really modern viewing window at the end. And I just love the combination of classic Disneyland aesthetics and then quite a modern looking penguin habitat. This was the only habitat I built in Pamoja Wildlife Park. Just this habitat and the entrance that we saw earlier but I really enjoyed collaborating with other builders, especially builders as good as the people that I helped build this. This little interior part you see here was built by one of the other builders, Iben, and she added the perfect ending to a habitat that I really liked. Next up is a build which is probably the best build I'd ever done at the point that I did it. It's big, the animals in it are big. It's the crocodiles and Cayman Center at Tekton Zoo. This was the first time that I tried to make a complex of habitats all in the same building rather than just doing one habitat for each animal. So as well as the big saltwater crocodile habitat, there's one next to it for Cuvier's dwarf caiman, and behind it a habitat, or a nursery rather, for the baby saltwater crocodiles. I went full on modernism with this build, all white concrete and primitive shapes. This is the little nursery, and I think my first ever custom billboards on a habitat as well. I really like the way that 3 circular buildings join together, and I got loads of detail up on the roof with all the planting and the railings and things like that, which you can only see from these cinematics. I really went to town on the detailing on this build. I think I did it over 2 episodes, so I had more time to work on it than I normally do. You can see even the inside is detailed, which is pretty rare for me. Definitely one of my favourite builds in Tekton Zoo, this. Let's move on to number 2 on the top 10 list. I've actually made some improvements to this build just for this video. You can see it in the background there. It's the penguin pool at London Zoo 1985. This is kind of where it all started for me, this habitat. This is an original Tekton build in London Zoo. I remember seeing it when I was a kid. I absolutely loved it, and learning how to build it using the plaster pieces was definitely a major step forward for me in terms of my building skills. I went back in and actually put a new bottom for the pool in for this video because I wasn't happy with the old one. You can see how it's basically just a hole back when I first built the zoo. But it was building this that made me decide to build an entire zoo in this slightly ridiculous architectural style, so I'm really glad that I built it. Speaking of ridiculous zoos, let's move on to number 1 in the top 10. It's the entrance at Tekton Zoo. I still love this build, even though it's been so long since we built it. When I went back to shoot some new cinematics for this video, which you can see here, I realised I just still really enjoy looking at it. This build was the first proper Planet Zoo video I ever posted on my channel. I remember wondering if anybody out there would be interested in watching me play Planet Zoo or not. I was so excited when I got my first sort of 2 or 3 likes on the video. So I guess it'll always have a special place in my heart, and that is why it is number 1 on this list. We've made quite a few changes to it since it was first built, adding the photos, or the posters rather, that you can see here on the sides of the entrance, adding some banners outside, but in the main it's pretty much the same as it was on the day that we built it. And there you go, that is my top 10 builds of all time. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you again very soon for some more Planet Zoo. Bye.